to this catalytic conversation where we are going to dive into conversations around character, virtue, thriving, citizenship, religion, a whole host of others, but how this set of conversations is playing out in the world of education and people who've been doing this work, catalyzing this work internationally for years, and how we're extending that work with Western Governors University with our Character Education for a Better Society project. We are joined by a couple of folks who can really help us unpack this. Beth Purvis is the Education and Character Program Director with the Kern Family Foundation. She brings 30 years of experience in the world of education, and most recently she was a Secretary of Education in Illinois. And she is a huge champion of this conversation in particular as it extends into leadership. Hey, Beth, how are you?
I'm well. Thanks for having me here this morning.
Okay. And then from across the pond, we've got James Arthur, who is the director of the Jubilee Centre at University of Birmingham. James has been the chair of the Society of Educational Studies, the head of the School of Education. He was the deputy pro-vice chancellor from 2015 to 2019. And he's even he was made an officer of the British Empire in 2018. He has been the champion of this conversation, especially in the UK, but also around the world. James, thank you so much for joining in.
Thanks very much, Mark.
Okay. So I'd like to start there, James, with I know the work that you have done in the Jubilee Center has been transformational for many. And it'd just be great for this audience to understand a bit more about the work of the center and kind of your kind of founding vision for it and what's been happening with it since its inception.
Okay. Well, the center was founded in 2012, but myself and a number of others who are members of the center have been working in character education for the last 25 years. So we've been doing this for a long time. So we didn't come to this without any baggage. We already had some quite well trodden ideas. So for example, all of us came together thinking that a neo-Aristotelian, following the teachings of Aristotle in his Ethics, was a very good way to begin the conversation. So we don't think that Aristotle answers everything, but we do think that it's a very good way to begin a conversation about virtues and character. And so the center was founded in 2012, really by the John Templeton Foundation, because they were the ones behind it, especially its president, Dr. Jack Templeton, who was very keen that we start a center that really promoted the idea of character and virtues. So both of them go together. The virtues form character, and the character develops the virtues as well. So he was very keen that we did both. Now, we were in agreement with that because we'd been doing research on this, as I said, for some time prior to that.
I love the fact that one of the things it feels like your center champions is this idea that this is something to be explored at the personal level and the societal level, that there's a deep interconnection between the two. You might want to talk about that just for a little bit.
Okay, so the virtues themselves, the virtues of honesty, humility, tolerance, compassion, empathy, these types of virtues have to be in relationship. So you can't talk about them in an individualistic way. You have to be honest to someone. You have to be compassionate for someone. So each virtue only forms itself in a relationship with other people. So it's really about your neighbor. It's about the people that live close to you, your family. It's about the people that you go to school with. It's about the people you go to university with, the people you work with in society. It's about society generally. And so the virtues are absolutely essential for the functioning of a good society. And so we basically sort of felt that, to promote those virtues, we need to be in relationship. So the virtues are basically things that you do in relationship to others. They don't exist in a vacuum. They don't exist in isolation.
Yeah, that integrated core, it just seems so transformational when you think about. It's hard to talk about big ideas like, whether you're talking about environmental science and the Green Revolution, whether you're talking about social justice, all of it relates back to the core virtues and how people are connecting with other people.
Yes.
As you approach this work with the Kern Family Foundation, you might want to just talk a bit about what drew you to this conversation. I know your founders in particular are deeply committed to this and have really wanted to help champion this in the world of education.
Well, when Bob and Patricia Kern, when they founded the Kern Family Foundation in the late 90s with their 3 daughters, they really were looking at how could they contribute to flourishing communities. And when they talk about flourishing communities, they talked about our animating ideas of an entrepreneurial mindset, deep character, and individual's life purpose. And they have been doing work in character since 1997, since their first grants. But it was in the discovery, I believe, of the James and the Jubilee Center's framework on character education that they found a framework that could really talk to both K-12 teachers, but also universities and faculty members like those at Western Governors University who are thinking about how do we prepare the rising generation of teachers, and for the Kern Family Foundation, really leaders. And this idea of character formation towards the cultivation of practical wisdom, or as James has often said, it is making, good decisions in context. It is practical, phronesis is practical wisdom in context. That we thought about how this could really support the Kern Mr. and Mrs. Kern's, and now Mrs. Kern has passed away, but Robert Kern's real interest in how do we help school leaders, specifically principals, in creating schools that have adults of character, who are the teachers, the staff members, the administration, but also can create schools that both close the achievement gap and get children ready, develop their whole person, and specifically their character. So as an educator and someone who's been in public ed in one way or another for 30 years before I came here, I don't think that I ever had that type of training in my own leadership training. So that's what brought me personally to this work. And I think for the Kern Family Foundation, the idea of the Jubilee framework as being a lens through which different K-12 schools and universities could look at the development of character, whether they're using an Aristotelian or a neo-Aristotelian model or another deep source.
Yeah, and James, it's powerful when you think about the notion of the Aristotelian aim of studies are not just to know what virtue is, but to become good, right? And the idea that at that core, if you want to create a better person, a better society, a better functioning government, whatever it is, you actually have to do this work, and it is formation work, right? As you're trying to lean into it. Talk a bit about how you have engaged educators in this conversation and help them understand the value of it, and how they can apply that practical wisdom, and then also help students and help their leaders kind of embrace it as a way forward.
Well, I'm saying when we produced the framework and sent it round to lots of principals, we sent thousands of copies of it to lots of principals in the UK. We had a huge response. We had many principals phone us up, email us, telling us that they liked what was being said, but they wanted to know, how do you do it? They thought that you could just take something from a shelf and, take it from the shelf and just implement it. And we didn't have anything for them really to take from the shelf at that stage. And I was encouraging them to think about what could they do in the context that they found themselves in. Because as Beth said, this framework is a lens. And when people look through a lens, they see different things. And they see different things because they come from a particular background. They're in a particular context. Now, many of the things are the same, but they'll see other things as well. So we wanted people to make their own decisions, because we said at the beginning, there's no blueprint for this. This is not something that's top down. This is something that's bottom up. People have to discover it for themselves. And we also found that teachers sometimes said, well, we already do that. And to some extent, they're right. Every school, every educational institution is involved in some form of character formation, because they all want their children, their students, to live well in a world worth living in. So they've all got this idea about, they've gone into education to better the experiences of children, to improve them in some way, either academically or as a person, etc. And that means that they must have some idea about what a human being is. They must have some conception. If you're going to improve someone, then you have to have an idea, an aim of where you're going to take them in their journey, their educational journey. And we found that we opened up conversations. And that's what we wanted to do. We really wanted to open up conversations so people and educationists talked about this in a way that they perhaps have not made it as explicit as perhaps they should do. Because sometimes when they say, we already do this, they probably feel that they do that, but they can't really explicitly say how they're doing it. And so this language of character that we were trying to provide for them helps them navigate that in a way, helps them to think about it.
Yeah. Beth, that's in some ways, this is the power of this movement, is making what is implicit, whether you like it or not, you're teaching a character framework. You just might not, you haven't really thought it through, right? Or maybe you have, but this is taking that implicit process and making it very explicit so you can get concrete about how you want to drive forward. Right?
Yeah.
So Beth, talk about the importance of that, especially with leaders, right? Because part of what they're doing in their schools is they're not just setting a tone, they're setting a framework, right, for how they're going to kind of anchor this across the curriculum and also across the policies and practices, right?
Exactly. And I think in the United States, for a bit of time, character education got sort of a bad rap, and partially because it was these add-on programs at the end of the day or the beginning of the day that was not intentionally integrated throughout the school day. And so I think what is occurring now with our partners through the assistance of the Jubilee Centre and others who are experts in this is the idea of how do you help school leaders become intentional about this? And again, when I think back to the framework, that using this lens, we start with the lens on the adults, not on the children. So what are the adults doing to, as the framework talks about character being caught, taught, and sought, how are we modeling character every day? How are we integrating it into the lessons our students are learning? And how are we creating opportunities for both the adults and the children to build their own character? So there's this idea that character is a journey. I think the second piece of this that I think is different, and one of the reasons that it has really caught on with the over dozen higher ed partners that the Kern Family Foundation is working with right now, is it is saying, look at deep sources and understand that you have to have a character knowledge and move to character reasoning, and then embed character practice, both for the adults and the students in the school. And it looks very different in different schools, as it should, but the fact that through partners like the Jubilee Centre and with the partners we're working with now, it's not an add-on for the end of the day. It's a completely different way of being intentional about how we are developing character, the same way that we would develop any other skill and knowledge. But this is something that will, Mr. Kern would say, is even more important than the academics, because this is how you will interact with each other, with your families, with your communities. So it is really being as intentional about character formation and being as reflective as adults as we would with any other part of the school program.
So important. I mean, the whole notion of this being this combination of habits of heart, habits of mind, right? And James, I'd love for you to unpack this a little bit, because in our modern society, as our kids are wrestling with a flood of information from all different kinds of sources, rarely heavily curated or vetted, right? It's just pouring in. And this whole notion of helping them think about this in a sense of intellectual virtues, moral virtues, civic virtues, performance virtues, and how that informs practical wisdom, and helps them think through their decision making, that whether they're going to believe something, what they're going to connect to. There is this, I feel like there's almost this sense in kids that there's nothing they can believe in. Everything seems to fall apart. Everything seems to be fake. Everything seems to be not real when they get below the surface. And having this habit of mind, the way you kind of outline it, just gives them the sense of, okay, how do you process this world the way it is, and then get to a place where you can practically make wise decisions, because it's going to just be so important for them, don't you think?
Well, absolutely. I think that we live in a skeptical age. We live in an age which talks about pluralism, but in actual fact, what happens is that children are basically gaining information, through the internet, which is a very important, area of their lives these days as well, not just the school. But education is not simply about information. Education is about transformation. And teachers who become teachers, who become educators, are in the business of transformation. They're not simply providing information for children. That's why it's very important that teachers understand what are they trying to transform, human beings, and what journey are they taking these children on? So what are they going to end up with? And modern education doesn't really talk about that very much. It doesn't talk about the ends of education, about what the purpose of education is. We've forgotten that, really. And we simply talk about education in a technical way. And children are not robots. They need relationships. They need the teacher to be involved with them. Nobody sends their child to a school where the teacher is indifferent to them. So they want teachers who are committed. And if the teachers are committed, the children that they teach will eventually decide for themselves what commitments they want to make in their lives. And that's what education's about. It provides choice. It helps us to be critical. It helps us to be rational. It leads us to a reasoned life, a life where we can make decisions for ourselves. And that's where a lot of educationists sometimes get it wrong. They talk about critical thinking, but they don't actually give them the tools for them to be critical in a way. So children learn a great deal from the example of their teachers. Teachers are role models to some extent for students, and their peers are role models as well for them. So eventually children have to make certain commitments, and that's why it's important that we have a system that is about transformation, and that's about forming people as well.
Yeah, I love the notion of, to what end, right? We're moving towards, we're trying to move towards human flourishing and the idea of transformation. And one of the things I love about the way you've framed character-based education and the study of virtue and citizenship and religion and kind of the broader human flourishing is the idea that this isn't, and Beth, this is maybe something for you to talk about a bit. Like you'd said, it feels sometimes old-fashioned to talk about character education, but in truth, there's nothing more transformative. There's nothing more forward-looking, because in the end, if we're going to try to help kids create a better world, we want them to help us create a better world. They having these habits of mind will help them approach that transformation in a thoughtful, more explicit way, and then help guide that transformation in a way that actually has that combination of the kind of intellectual virtues, moral virtues, the civic virtues, and the idea of kind of performance virtues. Beth, just talk about how important this is for folks to realize this isn't about going to an old-fashioned traditional thing. This is about the future. This is about training, helping kids develop these habits of mind so they can transform the world and make it a better place.
Well, I actually think not only is it not old-fashioned, when done well, this actually is freeing for the classroom teacher. Yeah. It's really hard to be a principal right now. It's really hard to be a teacher. We have teachers who are afraid to talk about things in classrooms because they're afraid of getting in trouble from administration, from the school board, from teachers, from parents. But when they learn the universality of these virtues, that the intellectual humility, forgiveness, empathy, kindness, love, joy, these exist across the wisdom traditions, that talking about something like forgiveness in the midst of a cancel culture can be very freeing. So how do we help teachers have the language to talk specifically about some of these virtues in a way that actually brings their classroom closer together and brings their community closer together? And an example I'll give is in the school, the charter school network that I ran in Chicago, many of our high schools used restorative justice practices. Yeah. But I would argue, unless you talk to kids about forgiveness and really have them think about what does that mean in my school, in my family, in my context, I don't know how you actually have a successful restorative justice program, because part of that is actually finding forgiveness for the person. So I think not only, Mark, is it not old-fashioned, by helping teachers and school leaders better understand these virtues or assets or character, whatever the terminology you want to use, can actually help teachers can free them up to have the language to talk to kids when they have a pluralistic classroom in front of them, but from a point of view that is universal.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the neat thing about this is, go ahead, James.
Could I comment on that as well, Mark? I think Beth is absolutely right about the forgiveness example, because, you know, when you think about character, it's not indoctrination, it's not old-fashioned in that sense, because what you have is, you have a dynamic situation in the classroom. Every teacher is involved in character education, whether they're conscious of it or not, whether it's for good or ill. So they're all involved in it. This happens anyway. And I've always said that good education is good character education as well, by nature. Now, if you go back to the 90s, the late 90s, it was Bill Clinton who was promoting character education. A lot of these ideas in Britain and the USA have actually come from the left. They've come from the left of centre, the idea of character. And Bill Clinton and his Secretary of State were very much encouraging character, giving out grants to states, federal grants to develop character, sort of thing. The Republicans didn't do so much of that. And I remember once I was at Roosevelt House in New York, and I gave a talk, and afterwards a Dean of Education put his hand up and said, you know, I agree with what you say, but this business of virtue, he said, we Americans, we don't talk about virtue. Only Republicans talk about virtue, which I thought was very strange, because I had been to all those character conferences that Bill Clinton led. He had these White House character building conferences every year when he was president. And I went to a number of them. So I know that that wasn't true. It was also the time when Americans spoke to each other. Today, it seems like, you know, people have just got off the Mayflower and that the Puritans are in charge. And what you have is that everything is black and white, no shades of gray, that everything, you're either with us or you're against us, and that people cannot disagree with each other agreeably. And so we're in that tragic situation where people are polarized and not talking to each other. Well, character is the opposite of that. Character is about dialogue. Character is dynamic. It allows people to talk to each other and to respect each other. And that's why character is more important today than it was before.
Yeah, go ahead, Beth.
If I can just add one other thing. I had the good fortune to visit a school on the West Coast called the Intellectual Virtues Academy. And I watched kids talk about a teacher-led discussion. One of the students came in, was not ready, was not listening to a peer. And rather than it turning into the adult yelling at the child or saying, wait your turn, they turned it into a conversation about what's one of the things we promise each other. It's intellectual humility. And what is intellectual humility? Understanding that I have something to learn from my, you know, from the child sitting next to me and from the adult. And I thought it was a great example of, in this day and age, when humility is not something that is celebrated and that we find ourselves talking past each other, that the idea of teaching kids to look at even being disrespectful in a classroom, not as I'm being disrespectful to the adult. It is that I am not approaching my learning with intellectual humility. And if I don't, I will not accomplish what I want to. And it was just a great example for me on how there are some teachers and some leaders across the country in schools talking about these virtues in a way that is getting these kids ready for the work world, for conflicts at home, for conflicts in their neighborhood. So I do think, again, there are, when the adults really embrace these virtues as a way to bring kids together, they're incredibly powerful.
Yeah, I don't know if you've read, there's a book called Think Again by the professor at University of Pennsylvania, Adam Grant, who talks about this notion of confident humility, right? And not approaching conflict as a preacher, as a prosecutor, or as a politician, but actually being willing to kind of dive into a dialogue around it. And and what's fascinating is he's now this eminent consultant working for all these major corporations, helping them do this. Like everything you're talking about right now is helping people in these large organizations and corporations. How do you have productive conflict where you can literally have confident humility and be willing to ask the tough questions and wrestle with some of the tougher issues? And these are, again, habits of mind that our kids are going to have because they're the ones that are valued, that will probably, again, help us have a thriving society and kind of drive forward. The really exciting conversation on this. James, I'd love for you to talk just a bit about the center and the work you're doing, and then Beth, I'd love for us to talk a bit about the work we're going to be doing with Western Governors University in particular around our project. But James, I want you to just give us a quick background on the services the center provides right now and the kind of programs you're providing.
Well, when we're a research centre, we're predominantly research. We began almost 100% research into character, doing empirical studies. We were looking at the professions, not just schools. We were looking at character in public life and the discourse of character in public life as well, in the public domain. But we began to realise fairly quickly that we needed to sort of help teachers in particular in schools and also the professions to begin to develop tools that they could use in the classroom and also within professional training for character. And so we began to employ practitioners in the centre, calling them teaching fellows. And we have a number of them now. And we work very closely with schools, doing some of the practical and development work there as well. One of the things we discovered very early on, that there was demand all over the world for this. So we were in the very early stages, we were getting invitations from Singapore, South Korea, Japan. We found ourselves working with civil servants in Tokyo. We found ourselves on platforms with ministers in Singapore, in Malaysia, in South Korea, in Asia. That was very popular. And then we had huge interest in Saudi Arabia, in Dubai. We've had interest in Latin America, from Argentina to Mexico, Brazil, so we've been everywhere, really, even Canada, I would say. So we've been in lots of places, and we work very closely, obviously, with the John Templeton Foundation in Philadelphia, but we have had this marvelous relationship for the last 5 or 6 years with the Kern Family Foundation. And we've been there as well, working with the Kern Family Foundation and some of their grantees. And that's been very, very fruitful in our discussions with them as well. So we're doing quite a lot in Europe and in various other places. And even in Africa as well, we've begun to work in places in Africa. Obviously, we can't do everything, but we have to choose what we can do well. And we've been working with UNICEF in the Balkans, in former communist societies in the Balkans, where even the concept of virtue was missing in their society. The questions of honesty, etc., in societies that were experiencing some corruption in government officials, etc., was something that we were working in schools as well. So we've been doing a whole range of projects that I could tell you about, but these are the types of things that we've been working with.
I love the fact that you've been catalyzing this conversation in concrete projects for a good number of years. Beth, as we've kind of envisioned the Character Education for a Better Society project with Western Governors University in partnership with the Kern Family Foundation, the post-pandemic era is an interesting time to launch it, because as we're coming in, the pandemic has taught a lot of people about grace, right? We've had to figure out how we're going to manage education differently given the context we've been living in. And we've had to really make changes in policy and practice and how we've connected to people. And it's opened people's eyes to different kinds of conversations. And one of the most compelling conversations I'm constantly hearing right now is, what have we learned and what are we going to bring forward? Right, we're going to enter an age of transformation in the world of education, because now we've been steeped deeper in technology than ever before. We've challenged long-held testing policies and interaction policies. We have a chance to kind of remake our world in some ways. I'd love for you to talk a bit about how this project, how a Character Education for a Better Society project, especially with the leaders, is going to be so important for the leaders who are going to catalyze these conversations, who are going to lead this work, for them to be able to enter with this kind of grounding, because it gives them a real purpose-driven way to do it, right?
Well, Mark, very excited about partnership, number one, with WGU. When I was in the governor's office in Illinois, actually, I was beginning to hear a lot about how you were meeting the needs. WGU is meeting the needs of a lot of adults in Illinois who are looking to complete their degree. And so when I came here and we started the introduction, I was excited to learn more about what you're doing. If I take a step back, what I want to start with is, as a foundation and our funder, we always say we work hard, but we don't do the hard work. What we have the unbelievable ability to do because of the generosity of the Kern family is to identify high impact organizations of the highest quality and support them in many ways in what we believe they would do otherwise. And so for the Kern Family Foundation, it has always been interested in character. For the 3.5 years that I've been here, part of what our team, the Ed and Character, has done is to say, first, how do we partner with the experts in this field? So, we have the partnership with James Arthur and the Jubilee Centre. We work with Marvin Berkowitz at the Center on Character and Citizenship. We work with Angela Duckworth at Character Lab. And we have given some funding to the Greater Good Science Center to help translate much of the science and the research behind character into work that educators can understand. At the same time, Mr. Kern has really been interested in how do we influence specifically school leaders. There are 74 million kids in schools in the United States, somewhere around 65 or 67 million teachers, and about somewhere between 125 and 126,000 principals. So we're saying, how can we partner with some of the most impactful and innovative school leader programs in the country? And obviously WGU is right there. So we are also working with you, we're just excited about your scale, your commitment to learning. I want to say to you, Mark, and to your faculty, since our first conversations, the way people have dug in to try to better understand what is character, what is the research behind character, what have people like James Arthur and his colleagues done to translate this into work that the average principal and the average teacher can use in their schools and be really effective with it. We're also working with national professional development providers. And then we are also looking for influencers. We work with PBS Kids, who thinks about social emotional learning and character during those very early years. So at the Kern Family Foundation, we have the good fortune to work with those of you who are really doing the hard work in the field. We try to connect you with each other and in some ways get out of the way. But WGU, when we look at our partnerships with WGU, with Arizona State University, with Grand Canyon University, and with others, you were ahead of the curve in understanding how the rising generation learns, how the rising generation is going to want to see going to college or graduate school. And we're just thrilled to be a partner to help your team learn and understand character. And we're excited to see how you will determine how to best infuse this through your College of Ed in a way that will significantly impact the next generation of school leaders, the next generation of school teachers. So starting with your micro-credentials or your online courses, we're just excited to see the feedback that you get, how excited people get about it. So we're along for the journey to learn with you in much the way with our relationship with the Jubilee Centre. And I want to personally, thank the work of the Templeton Foundation, because we are building upon the investments that they've made to see how, again, the generosity of the Kern family can influence how our next generation of leaders think about character formation as part of the overall design of schools, no matter what those schools look like. Do they look like traditional district schools? Is it online learning for kids? Is it learning in small micro schools or pods? We want to see this happen wherever kids are learning and wherever teachers are teaching.
It really is. We're entering a really dynamic time in the world of education. So many different models, so many different strategies, and like I said, we're all kind of emerging into what I would call the beginning of the middle of the pandemic responses and trying to kind of figure out our reinvention. But we're thrilled about partnering with you. I mean, a lot of people don't know Western Governors University is the largest college of education in the United States, 33,000 students across all 50 states. We're the #1 producer of credentials for students of color in the United States. We are big purveyors of course, the new technology, but our core philosophy is we want to help our teachers and leaders experience next generation leading and learning, right? We really have a core belief that we can help change the world by catalyzing next generation teaching and leading. And if we do that, it means that we have to lean into the kinds of conversations we're talking about here. So the idea of our project on character education for a better society, one is we are trying to create micro-credentials for principals. We're trying to weave it into, or going to weave it into all of our degree programs and make it a standard part of our degree programs, connect with the Jubilee Centre and their master's program in particular. But in addition to that, we're going to weave it into our other work, right? So we have this conception of a center for healthy learning, right? Which is this kind of a place for research and reflection and policy and practice around DEI work, SEL work, emergency aid, combined with mental health, and then bringing in this whole notion of character education, virtue exploration, and kind of a pathway conversations towards flourishing society. We love it. We figured that these are all, what's interesting is so much of that is Venn diagram work. They all connect with each other, right? And if we can kind of figure out how do we bring that together into kind of a thoughtful conversation, it's incredibly exciting. James, final words for the folks listening here as they think about whether or not it's going to be valuable to enter this conversation, whether they should put their toe in the water to learn more, maybe find out more about how to connect, just talk about how this kind of movement is clearly getting momentum, don't you think?
Yes, and we're in conversation with faculty at WGU, so we're already in that conversation. We're having a dialogue as equals, as academics. We speak to each other, so we're not coming with solutions. The solutions are for WGU to discover and design themselves. So we have been in discussion with a number of faculty for some time now, for the number of months, and that's been very, very productive and very useful for us as well to hear different takes on some of the things we say. But I think what we've done is we've sort of we wanted to sort of morally invigorate our public discourse, and that's what we've been trying to do in our conversations as well, to raise those big questions about gratitude, about humility. Some of these things are sometimes seen in the relentless pursuit of success by students. Some of these things sometimes are seen as useless. Some people think they're useless virtues. Why do I want humility? Why do I want to show gratitude? These are not going to make me successful in life. But actually they do, in a very profound way. So we want to see the future like this. We want to see the future in terms of us becoming more human, that we have a better understanding of what it is to be a human being in relationship with others. And we're trying to emphasize that. We do so in a secular sense, but we work with Christians and Jews and Muslims as well, and they do embrace this in a real authentic way. And but our real intention was to have this dialogue within a secular domain. That's why we used Aristotle from the beginning, because he can speak to that secular domain, but we also use the same ideas within Christian, Jewish, and Muslim contexts as well. And I have to say that they've embraced it just as much as many secular people have embraced it as well. So we can share and have a consensus about many of these things. I was going to give you an example of gratitude, just one example. And that example is this, that we founded a school at the University of Birmingham school. We set up this huge high school. It's the most popular school in the city. It's dedicated to the development of character. And as soon as the children arrive in the school at the age of 11, they're taught how to cook. And then they're asked to invite members of their family or anybody they'd like to say thank you to. We call them gratitude meals. And they have to cook a 3-course meal for someone that they'd like to say thank you to. And these have been incredibly popular with parents. And often the children will invite their grandparents in. And I can't tell you how the relationship between the school and the parents and even their grandparents has increased as a result of these gratitude meals. That the parents just love it. They think this is absolutely fantastic that their kids are actually cooking a meal for them in school, and the kids love it, the parents love it, and everyone learns from it. These are the transformative moments of actually teaching concepts like gratitude.
I love it. I love it. Beth, in the middle of the pandemic, my daughter, Alexandra, who's 22, she's a rising educator at University of Texas at Austin. She'll be graduating in the next year. We took a beat. And one of the things we did is we wrote a children's book, and a children's book was intended to help with habits of mind. And so it's a book called The Sugar Chair, and it's about an intergenerational family. And it's a story about a young girl who grows up with this puppy, and the sugar chair is with them the whole time as she grows up. And the sugar chair, the rhythm of the sugar chair is, instead of putting a kid in timeout, the sugar chair is a place you go to slow down, look around, figure out how to sweeten things up. You get the rhythm of it, but it's all about introspection, reflection. It's all about empathy and understanding. It's all about kind of growth mindset and understanding how you build something and do something differently. And it might begin with a sense of you might have to go in the sugar chair in the beginning, but by the end, you're looking for your sugar chair, your place where you're going to slow down and work those habits of mind, right? If you're going to do that. Beth, just for your final words on this stuff, we're entering a time where we have some great challenges in our world around just the way we talk to each other, about the discord that's out there, about the challenges we're facing. But we've got a real opportunity here to do things differently if we can take a beat and kind of learn together and figure out how we have these dialogues. I'd love for you just to talk about why you're excited about this work and invite the folks to participate.
Well, one of the real reasons we're excited to partner with WGU is because we think two things that you all do as well, if not better than anybody, is number one, that you're in relationship with your students. You talk about having 33,000 students in the College of Education, but knowing that that those students have a mentor to call on, have their instructors, and even have a group of professionals who are looking at the quality of their work and determining very specifically how to improve it. We think it's a different way of setting up a relationship with students. So we think the way your faculty is structured is unique, and there's much we can learn about how to be in relationships with adults. And there's much that schools can learn about how to be in relationships with their teachers and their staff. The other piece that we're very interested in is the fact that you are doing this in a competency-based learning way. And the fact that you are welcoming your 33,000 students where they are and helping them to get where they want to be in a way that is, that almost sounds like your sugar chair. It is in the, how do we find that rhythm? How are we reflective? How do we make sure that we're giving people both the content and skills that they need, but also the support and that reflective time? So why is the Kern Family Foundation excited about this partnership? For all of those reasons. And because with all of the other things that you could be doing in this moment of time, you've recognized the importance of character formation towards the success, not just of your 33,000 students, but for the success of the rising generation, the young children that they will be working with over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. So we're just very thankful for the partnership.
Well, we are super excited about the work we're going to do in the months and years ahead. James, Beth, if you were in the same location, I had the time, I'd be making a gratitude meal right now. Thank you so much for taking the time and participating. Really appreciate you adding your voices to this. And I would just tell the folks who are listening and watching, if you want more information, stay tuned. We're going to have a kind of a resource slide for you up with all the resources and the places you can go to find out more, so you can try to connect. But James, Beth, thanks again for everything.
Thank you, Mark.